My name is Charlene Margot, and I am the co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are so glad to have with us today Dr. Emily Weinstein and Dr. Carrie James. Welcome, Emily and Carrie.
Thanks so much for having us, Charlene, and thank you for that kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and can someone give me a thumbs up that indicates you can see my slides? Wonderful, thank you, Emily. So thank you for the kind introduction. As Charlene shared, Emily and I are both from a research center called Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Emily is a developmental psychologist by training, and I'm a sociologist by training. And what that means is that we bring both individual micro level insights as well as big picture insights to this really important topic of teens and screens. So today we're going to be giving you a little bit of a mini tour of some of our favorite insights from our latest research and from our book Behind Their Screens. We're so excited to be here. And I'm going to start with actually a work of art. Oh, before I'm going to show you pictures of us. Now you're familiar with what we look like. Okay, on to the work of art. So we want to start here with this painting, which is an optical illusion, actually. At first, you may recognize Vincent van Gogh from his famous self-portrait. But if you shift your perspective, you can also see that his ear is the pink hat of a girl in a long blue dress. And his nose is a seated man, maybe it's a farmer, looking across the landscape. His eyes are buildings out on the horizon, and his eyebrows are their roofs. So what does this have to do with teens and technology? We all have our own assumptions about social media, but our goal for today is to help you shift your perspective a bit, to change what you see, so to speak, about the topic of teens and screens. In short, there's more than meets the eye at first glance. So we're going to share today some insights from our research that actually shifted our perspectives and gave us new motivation to rethink our approaches to supporting young people in today's digital world. Emily?
Carrie and I have spent the last decade plus chasing answers to a set of timely questions about teens and screens. Questions like, what is it like for teens to grow up in a world with radical 24/7 connectivity? Most recently, we've had a particular interest in what's hard for adolescents about growing up with today's technologies and social media, and why. We also crucially and deeply care about this question: how can adults better understand and support kids around what's hard? We'll touch on all of these questions today and leave you with some actionable ideas about that last one in particular. So over the last few years, we had the opportunity to work on an amazing research project. You heard a bit in our bios, but we were collaborating with our colleagues at Common Sense on some lesson updates for their digital citizenship curriculum. And we started surveying students and educators about different tech issues and questions, initially as a way to ensure we were designing resources that were the most relevant and needed, really capturing the topics that kids wanted more support around. We ended up with tremendous interest and a data set of more than 3,500 responses from middle and high schoolers across the US. And we had one question in particular that really stopped us in our tracks when we started to review the data. The question was, what worries you most about today's digital world? So we had thousands of responses from the mouths of babes. And frankly, even a decade into research on this topic, what we were hearing really surprised us. So we got to work analyzing the data, and we realized that we actually needed to partner with teens to really grasp what we were seeing, to make sure that we were getting the story right. So we recruited a teen advisory council of 22 teens who came from different communities and contexts, identities, again, across the US. And again, Carrie and I kept asking them, what are adults missing that you most need us to understand?
So today we're going to give you a teen level view of 3 particular topics that our research and that close partnership with teens that Emily just described helped us see in a new light. Topics that teens wish we as adults understood much better. So our book Behind Their Screens covers a fuller set of topics. It also covers sexting, cyberbullying, mental health, social comparison, civic and political issues, cancel culture. And we hope you'll check it out if you're compelled by a topic that we aren't covering today. And you can also feel free to ask questions about any of the topics I just named or any of the ones on the screens, because we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Two qualifiers I want to name before we jump into talking about these topics. One is that our focus is on teens, but regardless of the ages of the youth you parent or teach or otherwise support, we think you'll find helpful insights to extrapolate for your own, work with teens and your own support of young people. Second, we're going to focus today, you may have, you may intimate from what Emily shared about that really compelling question, what worries you most? We are going to focus today on challenges, and it's not because we think social media is all bad. Rather, we're interested in the challenges, we're interested in teens' worries because we recognize that the positives for teens are and can be so huge. We see this constantly. We see upsides of tech for their friendships, for social support, for learning, for exploring their interests, for civic participation, and so much more. So, and we also appreciate that in many ways, and you may share this belief, being where you're located in Silicon Valley, that digital life is in many ways here to stay, even if we have a ton of work to do to make it better. So 2 qualifiers, caveats before we jump in. And now I'll turn it back to Emily to talk a bit about what we learned about the pull of the screen.
Okay, so managing the pull of the screen is a first team pain point that we want to explore. And it may surprise you, but teens' worries actually sound a lot like adults' concerns. One 13-year-old told us, I feel like I'm too interested in my phone instead of what's happening around me. I wish that I didn't use my phone so much. Here's another one from a 14-year-old. It's just scary to think that I only get one childhood and I could accidentally slip into a habit where I just wasted away on some pointless game. And it's not that these two, this 13 and 14-year-old are just outliers. We've now worked with hundreds of teens in different contexts, and we've consistently found that when the conditions are right, when they're not worried that we'll just take away their phones or impose new rules or be judgmental, teens will readily name specific worries they have about their tech habits. The pull of the screen is also captured by the compelling idea of the digital pacifier. So this is when teens describe using devices for a kind of self-soothing, and maybe you've even done this yourself, especially in social situations where they feel awkward, but they want to appear occupied, busy, really anything but awkward. Ironically, of course, using phones as a self-soother, as a digital pacifier, makes it even less likely that a teen will get comfortable in that setting and have a positive in-person interaction, because who wants to approach someone at a party who looks completely uninterested in talking and preoccupied? So trying to avoid looking awkward leads to pulling out our phones, and that reduces the likelihood that we'll strike up the kinds of conversations that would genuinely make us feel more comfortable and less awkward. So that's the digital pacifier idea. But of course, it's not only feelings like these, like wanting to not feel awkward, that pull teens to their phone. As we all know, there's plenty of pull from the device itself. So today's technologies are intentionally designed with features that are meant to attract and hold our attention, and really to keep us coming back for more. Think about features like autoplay, which removes the natural pause point that comes along with the end of a show or video, when we might have otherwise had time to say, that's enough, I have other things to do. Or similarly, infinite scroll, which was a change to our feeds and timelines that made it so we never reach the end of new content. Again, removing what would be a natural stopping cue. Maybe you can remember that it wasn't always like this. You used to just get to the end of new content on Facebook and that was it, but no longer. And then there are features like notifications that pique our interest, offering a promise of something rewarding. Sure, often nothing of note, maybe just even a spam email, but that actually contributes to the draw. It's what psychologists call a variable reward schedule. It's that unpredictability, and it's similar to what happens in gambling, actually. You never know when a rewarding, real substantive like or comment might come, and that really keeps us all on alert. Metrics like likes are especially compelling for adolescents who are also just developmentally primed to be sensitive to peer feedback. And now they have this quantifiable kind of feedback that's available around the clock. It's important to acknowledge we are all vulnerable to these pulls, these design pulls of technology, but teens' normal developmental sensitivities really amplify them. And in this way, technologies are playing and even preying on adolescents' developmental sensitivities. One especially memorable conversation captured an experience that Carrie and I heard on repeat. 16-year-old Graham was describing how dysregulated he can feel when he's browsing TikTok. And I asked him, when that happens, how do you stop? I don't, he said, ever. During one of our Zoom conversations, Graham wanted to share how much time he'd spent on TikTok during the prior week, but he didn't even want to say the number out loud because his mom was in the other room and he was worried that she might hear. So he typed into the Zoom chat instead. It was 24 hours. That's what he typed. And this was so interesting. Graham, like so many other teens we came across in our research, resisted adults' attempts at regulating his screen time. He made it pretty clear that he did not want parental intervention, but it would definitely be a mistake to think he wasn't worried about his own tech habits, his TikTok habits in this case, but others too. And although the prevailing narrative is that teens want unlimited screen time, they actually do worry about it. This is something we heard again and again. So how can we leverage this insight to be helpful? Adults often default to this us versus them battle with teens over screens, where we're like referees who are just blowing the whistle when they're over screen time or issuing a rule or a penalty when they do something wrong, when we want to enforce some kind of new screen time rule or consequence. But we found that adults are better positioned to deliver support if we rethink and recalibrate our roles. So we think of ourselves less like referees who are just enforcing and more like coaches who are really supporting skill building and guidance, strategizing with them around the things that are hard, the things that are pain points around technology. The idea of a coaching role gets us closer to an us and them approach to screen time that recognizes that this battle against tech and persuasive design is one that we're actually all fighting, and they are going to need active support and guidance to figure out how to live well with all of these pulls and really develop healthy boundaries, which they need. And because technologies are designed in ways that, as we talked about, really encourage mindless, constant use, one of Carrie and my goals in the work we've been doing with teens is really to support more mindful habits. And we wanted to share with you 4 ways that you can get started with that today. So the first is to talk about persuasive design. Talking directly about the design features, like the things I was mentioning a few minutes ago, can be really impactful. It's actually an evidence-based practice. Drilling down into how certain tech features are designed to persuade us to keep our eyes on the app is really powerful. And for adolescents, it taps into their sensitivity to being duped or manipulated, which they hate, and really motivates us to take back some control. So highlighting how things they value, like autonomy or fairness or agency, are being undercut by design tricks has actually been shown to increase their motivation to take back more control and really rethink and recheck their habits. The second thing you can do is actually ask about their tech habits. Invite reflection on habits they have that they like. This is really important. First, starting with what habits they have that they think are good, that they're proud of, that they like, and then asking about the habits they wish they could change. We like to ask, what do you think are some of your best habits? And then, are there any you wish you could change? Once you open up that conversation, the third thing you can do is design an experiment or personal challenge. Really have them in the driver's seat thinking about what experiment or personal challenge they might want to do. With our collaborators at Common Sense, we've done a lot of work creating tools that bring principles from habit science to digital habits. And one thing we've learned is that there is a ton of power in using the frame of experiments that invite teens to create a time-limited personal challenge to make a habit change and see what happens. In our work, teens have devised challenges to help them curb toxic comparison on Instagram. or to stop excessively checking their TikTok views and likes as soon as they post something. But they also sometimes choose things like proactively using a technology like a fitness tracker to meet their fitness goals. It's really so interesting to us to see what they choose. And it's just a fundamental shift from rules and lectures that focus only on limiting screen time. Because the overall goal here is to empower teens, to give them a sense of agency, helping them reflect on their habits, and then choosing habits they want to tackle, and then designing these little experiments to see what shifts might make a difference. Maybe it's getting the phone out of the room at night and sleeping with an alarm clock. Maybe out of the room feels too far, but they're willing to try an experiment where they sleep with it plugged in a different outlet that's even just across the room. These small changes can make a really big difference. And finally, in this category, taking stock of our own habits. So really tuning into what we're modeling. This has been such a big one that we heard and keep hearing from kids, a sense of parents' hypocrisy around our own tech habits. Carrie and I like to say modeling over magic, because no magic wand will undo the impact of the tech behaviors that our kids see us modeling day in and day out. So it really starts with us thinking about what tech habits we have that we're proud of and what our kids are seeing in our relationships with our own devices.
Great, thanks, Em. So we're going to turn to another topic, friendship dilemmas. And this is really relevant to some of what Emily just shared. She just highlighted the tech features that are pulling teens to their screens, pulling all of us to our screens. But a crucial aspect of the pull to the screen is not just those design features, it's also social. We know from teens that there are tremendous relational upsides to tech, staying in touch with friends who are from summer camp and live across the country, or just friends who are nearby, really nurturing their close friendships. But we also heard from teens that there are significant friendship pressures. We repeatedly heard a sense that being a good friend is really complicated by connected life. So there are a couple of ways in which this plays out. For one, teens often feel a pressure to be always available, almost as though it's a necessity for protecting and preserving their friendships. So a few teen voices that hit this point home. A 17-year-old told us, "I feel like if you're not connected, then the friendship will fall apart." And then a 13-year-old said, "If you don't text your friends for a while, they just come up with the dumbest excuse to cut you off." So there's this keen sense that's amplified by where they're at developmentally that disconnecting can mean losing friends. But the feelings also go the other way too. Staying connected is an essential part of being there for others. So another teen shared, a 17-year-old, "I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings if I can't stay in touch with them." And a 14-year-old told us, "My biggest worry is that I don't have enough contact with friends who are struggling. I don't want my friends to do something bad just because I didn't respond in time to stop them from harming themselves or worse." So this is one of the quotes in our research that actually really stopped us in our tracks. We are all alert to the fact that there's a true adolescent mental health crisis underway. A hidden side, a hidden toll to this is how hard it can be for the friends of those who are in crisis. Even if a teen is not personally struggling, right now they are more likely than ever to have someone in their network who is. Maybe it's a close friend, maybe it's someone more distant, but the prospect of seeing messages at all hours or posts that signal distress, but are really hard to interpret, which in a lot of cases they are on social media, this raises a lot of puzzles about whether, when, and how to respond and how to be there for others. Teens actually told us that always on part, that a friend can reach out 24/7 can sometimes be overwhelming. And it's interesting because there can be a lot of hand wringing over the idea that technologies are eroding our sense of empathy for one another. But we really heard loud and clear from teens that it's a sense of empathy that's actually the root of so many digital dilemmas that they feel and experience day in and day out. Even commenting on a friend's Instagram post can create pressures and puzzles. So 17-year-old Michelle told us that she really wants to be authentic on Instagram. She really wants to comment on her friends' posts with authenticity, but she also doesn't want to let her friends down. So this is how it sometimes goes down. One day she tapped the button to like her friend's picture, but she couldn't think of anything to say. Almost immediately, literally 30 seconds after Michelle liked it, she saw a notification that her friend was typing a direct message to her. Her friend said, "You didn't comment." So Michelle was like, "I'm thinking of a good one." Her friend's reply, "Okay, but can you do it soon?" And Michelle told us, and then I have to comment like 3 times, and it's so annoying. And I get really nervous because I have to think of something really quick, and it has to be something really good. So Michelle's story captures friendship dilemmas that are really at their heart about authenticity. When so much of posting, and maybe you see this in your own networks, so much of posting is an expectation, and over the top and immediate compliments can be the norm. Being authentic often feels nearly impossible. And knowing what's authentic when you're reading others' comments on your posts can be like reading the tea leaves. So that's one set of stresses. Of course, there are also other friendship stresses, those that emerge from outright conflict and social tensions.
There's for sure a lot of talk amongst adults about bullying and cyberbullying, but one of the things that really struck us as we dug into friendship dilemmas and social challenges was that we learned that teens really experience social conflict as much more of a spectrum that runs from blatant hostility for sure, but all the way to subtle jabs and also includes much more ambiguous acts. And this is important because some of what is stressful or recognized by teens as clearly mean can look totally benign to an outsider or an adult who doesn't know the context. So take the example of a teen who goes through and likes every single one of her peers' old social media posts. This seems neutral to positive maybe, but aggressive liking can actually be a way that teen A is saying to teen B, "I'm watching you," almost like instigating or provoking. Or consider comments that look nice at face value, but are actually meant to be mean. One of our teen advisors told us that when two girls have beef, a comment like, "Oh my God, you're so gorgeous. I wish I could be you," might be offered through gritted teeth and really meant as sarcastic and downright aggressive. Then there are other features of social media that can stoke conflict or hurt feelings. An especially salient example for some teens is Snapchat Snap Maps. So similar to Find My Friends, this feature shows where your friends are in real time. And monitoring the map can reveal that people are hanging out all together somewhere without you. The same goes for even seemingly benign kinds of new social information like Venmo exchanges. Imagine that you see 3 of your friends just charged each other for a Dunkin' Donuts run or for movie tickets. And suddenly you realize, hey, I wasn't invited to that. To be sure, the reality of being left out is nothing new, and it was not created by social media, but there are many, many new kinds of social information. There are many new kinds of social information for teens to really scrutinize and worry about. And adolescents, we talked about those developmental sensitivities. They're primed to care deeply about this kind of social information, what it means for their own friendships and for their social standing. Meanness can even take the form of cropping a picture to exclude a particular person before posting it, or tagging all but one of the people in a picture. So an adult might say, "Oh, I'm sure it's just an accident." If a teen even brings it up to us, we might say like, "Oh, I'm sure they just forgot to tag you." But there are times when teens told us they know it's not an accident. We also have this pot of tea, and we imagine that some of you are probably well aware of the dynamics around spilling the tea or sharing gossip through social media accounts. These anonymous tea accounts are created for a number of different purposes. Teens use tea accounts to circulate mean gossip, but they're not just mean-spirited. Tea accounts are also used for community-minded and even civic goals. So we've seen them used by teens to report sexual assaults, to call out racism or sexism, and to discuss policies in their communities. Yet, of course, it's super complicated that this discourse essentially gets intermingled such that it's coexisting with pure gossip and even really malicious gossip also. Receipts, typically in the form of screenshots or screen recordings, often play a key role in drama and conflict as well. And they regularly appear on many of those T accounts too. So the culture of constant screenshotting and recording creates abundant evidence that can resurface anytime someone wants to put you on blast. Okay, that's kind of anxiety provoking. Let's talk about what adults can do to help. One key is simply to acknowledge and recognize the spectrum that teens are navigating issues that really do span from clear-cut bullying to much subtler slights. If we, the adults, don't acknowledge the spectrum, we can end up minimizing anything that isn't on the blatant end, and in so doing, really overlook issues that are actually quite painful for teens. Next, empathy and validation. So simply creating and holding space for talking about what's hard can be really meaningful. Adults may not get exactly how Snapchat or TikTok work, but the developmental needs, the needs to be liked, to have friends, to be a good friend, these are age old, and you can actually make a big difference for kids by tapping into empathy and validating what's hard, what's familiar, the feeling there, saying things like, that sounds really upsetting, or I can see why that would hurt your feelings, instead of, oh, it's just Venmo or it's just Snapchat, don't worry about it. In terms of social emotional skills, we can also help teens build really concrete skills to navigate some of the friendship puzzles that they're facing. So one big puzzle we heard from some teens was around setting boundaries, helping them actually brainstorm language for when they want to disconnect. How do you tell friends you're going to be unavailable for a period of time? What can you do or say if someone's texting becomes burdensome, or if their expectations around digital communication are totally suffocating? To be honest, these questions are really hard at any age. You can probably relate if you have had a boss who emails you late into the night and you're not sure if they expect a reply, or if you have a friend whose texting starts to become overwhelming. It's hard to figure out communication that's effective and self-protective and aligned with the goal of preserving a relationship while setting those boundaries. So we can help teens actually brainstorm language and think about what kinds of boundaries they even want in the first place in this world where there's the possibility of 24/7 connectivity, and social norms vary so much in different groups around what their friends' real expectations are around how quickly they comment and reply.
All right, thanks, Emily. One more topic, and then we'll move into some discussion with Charlene and some questions. So our last topic is digital footprints, and this is one that is digital missteps that are so commonly feared. And as parents, it's understandable. We really care about our kids. We really care about their success. And our sense of stress and fear around digital missteps only spikes when we hear high profile examples of digital content, even from the way past, leading to harsh consequences. So a couple of headlines: the would-be editor of Teen Vogue was fired a few years ago before she even started her job for racist tweets that someone tracked down from years earlier. Our own home institution, Harvard, has seen multiple scandals related to students' online speech. From a case in 2017, 10 admitted students had their offers of admission revoked by the university after they discovered deeply offensive Facebook speech. And then just last month, a young woman, 24-year-old tech worker, was fired for posting a 20-second TikTok video. The content in this case was actually benign, but they could see in the background that she was supposed to be, or she was technically also in a meeting over Zoom at work. So she was dismissed for that reason. So again, consequences like these are why parents and schools expend a lot of airtime highlighting the worst case scenario to teens. With the best of intentions, we tell our kids, think before you post, because what you do online cannot be erased. And one misstep can get you kicked out of a college, denied a job, and ruin your future. I think what's hard for teens is that on some level, most of them know this already. So they're often well aware, like this 13-year-old shared with us. If you're young and make a post that the older you would regret, it's too late. Someone or something has already saved it and stored it, so that you have no way of deleting it. A 14-year-old said, if you make one wrong move, you could destroy your life. And this quote really struck us. My morals will change over time, and I don't want to be affected by something I did long ago. So teens can be genuinely alert to and struggle with the reality of an enduring digital footprint. At the same time, they're navigating normal adolescent developmental needs to develop their sense of self, to express themselves, to impress their peers. And they're doing all of this in a context where digital artifacts can be wrenched out of context and travel across space and time towards new meanings. Oops. Get back to where we were. So, one more thing on this front is that it's really important to keep in mind that despite the amount of care that teens take with respect to their own digital footprint, the reality is that so much of their footprint is out of their hands. A teen's peers post and record things that they would never want online. And we also do it on behalf of our kids well. We post pictures of them. So there's a certain layer of digital footprints that is literally out of their control. So let's get to what we can do. Digital footprints is perhaps our least favorite topic because we know they're so crucially important, but snappy tips really fall short of how complicated it is. So we advocate a real both and approach, both warnings and wisdom. So talking with young people about their digital footprints, especially younger adolescents and older children, talking about them from a risk perspective is really important, but we don't want our conversations to just begin and end with dire cautions and warnings. The stories we heard from teens again and again show that simply naming risks on repeat is an anxiety amplifier that offers no guidance about what to do, especially in that context where the pulls and the pressures to share, to post, to participate are so very strong. So in addition to warnings, adults need to approach this topic with a bit of wisdom, especially when missteps happen. Wisdom about acknowledging the impact of doing something wrong, posting something that is offensive, even if it wasn't your intent. Wisdom about making apologies and amends when they're due, and wisdom about learning from mistakes in a real growth mindset spirit and trying to move on. The reality is we're at a stage where we just need to do some work to anticipate missteps because they're going to happen. Teens also need to be pragmatic, and the reality is that they often are. They may not be able to scrub every trace of a misstep, but it is worth working to get things deleted whenever possible and using privacy settings effectively. We take inspiration. There are a lot of education efforts out there that really help youth proactively construct and manage their digital footprints, and we think that that's great. We also hear from teens savvy strategies that they deploy. They use private stories to segment their audiences. They create pacts with friends to vet their content before sharing it to reduce the possibility of future regret. So savvy strategies are out there, but we also have to keep in mind that they have their limits. Nothing is foolproof in a world where screenshotting and circulating is so easy and even routine. Okay, so we're going to move toward wrap up. Way back at the beginning of this talk, Emily mentioned that we had a group of teen advisors working with us over several months to co-interpret our data from the larger survey we conducted with 3,500 teens. And this was such an important part of our process to make sure we got the story or the stories that we were learning from the data correctly. And at the end of our sessions, we asked them to share their final reflections using this thinking routine that has come out of Project Zero, the center where we work. And it's, I used to think, now I think. Emily, do you want to share some of the things we heard from teens?
Yeah, so in teens' responses, one of the things that really struck us that I think we wouldn't have predicted were comments like these. I used to think I was alone in my thoughts, but now I know that I'm not. Seriously, this has been really good. I used to think that no one had a problem with social media and that everyone just saw it as like this perfect thing. And now I know that like other teens realize that it has problems with it. They just don't want to talk about it because nobody's talking about it. Hearing from other teens turned out to be really powerful, I think more than Carrie and I could have even imagined. And so did having an opportunity to just talk about some of the tricky parts of tech, about their digital and of their digital lives in a really intentional yet non-judgmental context. It wasn't our aim that the co-interpretation and the research discussions would be an intervention for the teens who participated, but it turned out that one of the most important things they taught us was how ready they were to connect with us and with each other about these topics, and how meaningful it was for them to hear that they weren't alone in their thoughts, they weren't alone in the things that were hard. We spent a lot of time thinking about how our own thinking has changed as a result of this research too, and what we're going to do differently as a result. We wanted to share just one high-level idea that's really stuck with us as an important pivot and an approach. And this came from an educator who we interviewed, and she said, I'm not interested in just giving my students a definition of sexting, because that's not going to help them make a decision at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. A lot of the tricky decision points happen when adults aren't around. So we need to think about how to open lines of communication so that teens come to us when they need us, but also how to help them develop the mindsets and dispositions to make savvy digital decisions at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, or really any other time. All right, thank you so much for joining us. So that brings us to the end of the presentation part of our session. We thought we'd wrap up and close out by returning to this painting that we began with. We started with the provocation that, as with an optical illusion, there is more than at first meets the eye when it comes to teens and technology. We hope this session has helped you see more than might have previously met your eye. We're so grateful that you spent your time with us. We know that attention is precious, and it is such a big gift to give people your attention in this digital age with so much information flying around. So Charlene's going to jump back on screen and moderate some Q&A for us.
Well, thank you so much, Emily and Carrie. That was a lot of incredible information. And parents, and educators who are on screen with us, I really, really recommend reading their book, because, again, I spent 10 years at IBM in educational software at the beginning, when computers were just starting. The complexity of what kids are facing today, I didn't understand. And I think that Dr. James and Dr. Weinstein have really done an amazing job explaining this complex world that our kids live in. All right, so needless to say, we have lots and lots of questions coming in. Let me just start with a few kind of more broad-based one, and then we'll narrow the discussion. Carrie and Emily, you say that in many ways, technology is just another medium for core adolescent friendship activities like self-disclosure, validation, conflict resolution. Is that something that we should share with our kids? Is that a helpful perspective? Or how would you explain that to parents?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the reality is that, I think that in the portion of our book where we say that, I think the header for that section is what's old is new, sort of. And so what we were trying to articulate there is the reality is that these media are venues for doing the same things that we have always done, starting friendships, giving care and love and validation to others, resolving conflicts. They're just new venues for doing that. But in some ways, they're different. They really transform our experiences. There are features of those technologies that give us, as Emily was sharing, layers and layers of social information that are hard to interpret. When we text someone, we're not always clear about the tone. So in what's old is new, sort of. They are transformed. Our relationships are transformed in many ways by these technologies, and teens friendships in particular. Emily, what would you add?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll just say, Carrie, I think I heard most of that, but I am having my own pulls to the screen and away from it, because I hear my toddler screaming her head off upstairs right now. And I know she's in good hands, but oh my goodness. So I'm feeling the pull. So hopefully I won't repeat anything that you just said, but I think one of two really important points on, Charlene, I love that you brought that up. Two really important points that I think we think about. One is just that recognizing and really like zeroing in on what's familiar is such a helpful way for us to tap empathy, because honestly, like so much of this can feel so new and different that we're like, ugh, like I have no idea what it's like to find out I'm left out through Snapchat or whatever it is. But actually recognizing what's familiar, the like, okay, the feeling of being left out can really help us get into that headspace of like, what would be helpful? Like what helped me when I felt left out? What do I do when I have those tricky emotions? The other thing is that I want to be really, I think Carrie and I feel really strongly that it's not to say like, as Carrie was saying, like what's new is old. We say sort of because we know that tech can be such a huge amplifier. And so I really just want to like underline that point, that it's not to say like, oh, this is just all the same. There are really important ways that tech is upping the ante and really amplifying what's going on.
Now I'm worried about your baby too, Emily.
I know, I'm worried too. Carrie will do the next question and I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, fine. All right, Carrie, you can handle this one. As a developmental educator, I love that you ended the book talking about digital agency, both personal and collective for kids. Carrie, can you tell us more about what that means? Our friend Al Bandura's work continues on.
Oh, it's so important. So agency is that sense of control, that sense that we can do something, about situations that we're in. And, across the different topics that we talked with teens about, that we collected data from them about sexting and friendship pressures and digital footprints, we heard this through line theme around their worries that they felt like they didn't have a lot of control.
Yeah.
And that's really worrisome. So, teens express to us that they're not feeling a lot of agency, but they're trying to find it where they can. And as adults, there are ways in which we can help support their sense of agency. And we lay out in the conclusion of our book 3 different kinds of agency that we want to be thinking about. So one is personal agency, the things that you can do as an individual that are within your sense of control. And so for our teens, that's, when we were talking about digital footprints, it's really making use of those privacy settings and using private stories on Snapchat to share things that are just really meant for close friends. That's really building a greater sense of control over audience in that case. Some of the things that Emily laid out in terms of supporting, empowering our kids around digital habits, that also belongs in the personal agency bucket, like that they can develop a greater sense of control over those pulls to the screen. So that's personal agency. There's also social agency or collective agency, and this is where the social piece comes in. So I mentioned how teens can turn to one another to vet content before they post it on social media. And in fact, create agreements in some cases where they turn to one another before they post and tag each other in posts to make sure that everyone agrees that you're actually giving consent or permission like you would when you fill out a form. But these are more informal packs that they've formed, but they're incredible to see. And as adults, we can encourage that kind of thing. And we can also turn to our kids, as I do, before we post pictures of them and say, are you okay with me posting this? How would you feel about it? The third bucket is proxy agency, and that's where adults definitely come in. Proxy agency is out of recognition that there's only so much power that young people have. They can't vote. They're not in those conversations within tech companies or in Washington, D.C., where policies are created. So as adults, we need to use our power to advocate on behalf of teens for things that are going to be for their well-being, whether it be particular legislation against, privacy tech companies, sharing data, collecting data from young people, really advocating to our schools for better digital citizenship and better digital well-being support. So there's a lot that we can do on behalf of our kids, but a crucial part of this is really understanding what they're up against. So some of those smaller recommendations, the quote unquote smaller than advocacy in Washington, are really, really important because they involve really listening to our kids and tuning into what's hard for them.
Oh, such great advice, Carrie. We were just talking about digital agency, Emily, as as a developmentalist. To me, this is so important that as parents, we can support giving kids some semblance of control, right? Because in reading your book, I mean, it just seems exhausting what the kids are having to deal with every day.
Yeah, we feel that.
True.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so now we are going to turn to questions from the audience, and needless to say, there are many. So I'm going to apologize in advance. Wonderful questions. Thank you, everybody. We're going to see what we can get to in 10 minutes, okay? Parent says, loved your book, especially the youth perspective. I'm wondering if a high schooler is not exhibiting any mental health concerns, is getting good grades, participating in extracurriculars, should I still be concerned about the amount of time he's spending on his phone?
Carrie, do you want me to start or do you want to start? I'll begin.
You can start.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
you can begin.
I love this question, and I love to hear that you have a teen who is thriving. I think this is great. So the answer is like, do we need to kind of panic about screen time just to panic about screen time? I think is like one of the big questions here. Carrie and I really it was so interesting to us, like really engaging with the research and the data that are available about screen time, because so many of us have seen headlines about screen time, and I think carry in our own parenting like an enormous sense of guilt. And I feel this even though I know all the data, that like anytime that they're on their screen, like should they be doing something else that's better? I'm saying better in quotes, because one of the things that we see in the data is that screen time is it's not like X number of minutes of screen time is a problem and Y number is totally fine. There's a lot of variation from one kid to another, and kids' different vulnerabilities that they're bringing to their screen time are getting magnified and amplified in different ways. And for some kids, their screen time is super positive and it's not interfering with other essentials, and it's helping them feel connected, and they're exploring interests, and it's not creating any big issues or any big stresses. And I think it's even for those kids, we have to recognize the design pulls of these technologies. So we still want to be having those conversations about design features. We still want to be asking about their habits and thinking about how to support tech boundaries. But I think that we can break free of this sense that like there is just something wrong anytime a kid is looking at their phone or is on a device, because the data really don't support that. And we see that there are some kids who really are doing fine. They're figuring out how to manage this. And yeah, that's really an important part of the story too. Kara, I wonder if it would be helpful for you to just say a word about the orchids and dandelions idea that we found to be so helpful around this.
Yeah, so there's a concept in various sciences called differential susceptibility. It sounds very fancy, but it essentially means that people, and in the case of this conversation, young people, are differently susceptible to various risks. And so this is true with respect to technology and social media as well. And the metaphor of orchids and dandelions is a really helpful way to think about this, because orchids are flowers that are really sensitive to their climate, their conditions, and dandelions can weather an array of conditions, and they're pretty hardy flowers. And so if you have two kids, I have two kids, you might notice they're really different from one another, probably in a variety of different ways. Mine are. And one of my kids is much more orchid-like, much more sensitive, much more vulnerable to risks. And the other is much more dandelion-like. Things, she's not that she doesn't get stressed, but she's able to manage the stresses in a variety of ways. And so my parenting of them in general is distinct to those risk profiles. But my digital parenting especially is distinct. And so I do a lot more kind of oversight with my kid who's more orchid-like. She's also a little bit younger, but that orchid piece is so important because I know she's much more vulnerable to a lot of risks that my older child can handle.
Well, speaking of parental controls, that is a question that we're getting a lot here today. So parent asks, what are your thoughts? Oh, one thing I will say is Bev and I watched during the pandemic, because things were so out of control with kids in remote learning, that they started to clamp down. So we saw more conservative parenting than we had seen in previous years. And that included more questions about digital devices. So here is the question. What are your thoughts about parental controls or device monitoring apps? And are there any you like or recommend?
Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll start. So in terms of parental monitoring, this is really interesting. And, in our role as researchers, we spend a lot of time like asking teens what's helpful and what is like, how do you feel about parents monitoring? When is it good? Would you monitor if you were a parent? And one of the things that I think we've seen very clearly is that, and this question probably, I think this is embedded in the idea, but what's appropriate changes a lot with younger kids versus older kids.
Yeah.
Carrie and I really like to think when it comes to tech, we really see the value in like a gradual release where we start with our kids with much more active involvement that's totally transparent. We say things like, my job is to help you figure out how to learn to use this device. It's really exciting, but there are a lot of, there's a lot of tricky stuff associated with it. And so I am going to be fill in the blank on whatever your strategy is. I'm going to be doing spot checks, like checking your text messages once in a while. Not because I don't trust you, but because your friends' parents might be checking their text messages too. And I want to help you remember that nothing you say in this context is private. Of course, what's appropriate with a 12-year-old is totally different than what's appropriate with a 17-year-old. And so just recognizing that it is developmentally appropriate and essential that kids have more independence and privacy as they get older. And so thinking about how to keep doing that, saying to younger kids, like, we'll keep assessing and reevaluating this as you get older. And I trust you and I'm in this with you. And I think that Carrie and I really ascribe to the idea that monitoring can be a really effective part of coaching. But it's really important that it's transparent, because when we see parents monitoring behind kids' backs, we hear consistently from kids about the ways that it undercuts trust, it drives behaviors underground, it leads to them like trying to be more sneaky with tech and then getting into even riskier situations where they're even less likely to go to parents when they then need support. Carrie? And Charlene, I bet you have things to say about this, so you should jump in too.
Carrie's thinking.
I think you covered it really well.
It's such an interesting point. My own daughter, who's a design researcher at IDEO, took herself completely off of social media 3 years ago. And her older brother said, no way, won't last, never going to happen. She's never been back. So she's navigating this world of young adults with no social media. So it's a really interesting thing. It is possible, parents, kids do it. But speaking of, one of the things I thought was so interesting in your book was the difficulty that kids can have with decoding text. Here is a perfect example. Listen to this question. My son said he met a girl at a dance, and after they were texting for a few days, she didn't text for one whole day, so he dropped her because she hadn't texted for a day, and he thought that was a long time. Is this true?
I totally believe him that this happened. One of the things that was really interesting to Carrie and to me when we were looking at our data around like communication norms and talking to teens about this was we would hear from teens who were like, the expectations my friends have are insane. Like they want me to respond within like 30 seconds. And then we would talk to another teen who would be like, I don't understand. I'm so anxious when my friends don't respond. Like I always respond to them right away. So why don't they respond to me? And when they leave me hanging, it makes me feel so worried I did something wrong. And then we would hear from other teens who are like, I am opting out of this. Like, if you have a problem with my communication, like this is no, like I will not play this game. And so there is like really a lot of variation. And one of the things that I think we started to take really seriously was that some teens really are experiencing from their friends very real and tremendous pressure and expectations that they will be always available. And we're best suited to help them figure out how to navigate that and think about resetting some boundaries or communicating like, I really care about you. And like, here's why I'm not available or whatever, or just I'm not available. When we take seriously that actually they might really be getting those pressures from friends, which, they are very real. Carrie, is there anything else we should say on this?
I would just add that sometimes that's in some cases, and this is where like talking to your teen is really important, an adult's intervention to, being able to blame the adult. I'm not available because my parent won't allow me to have my phone during these hours can be really helpful. And that's, some teens tell us that it's in some ways a relief to be able to share that it's out of my hands. I can't be there for you during 10 and, after 10 p.m. at night, for example.
I just wanted to note that there's something kind of interesting. I'm having a hard time keeping up with the chat while we're talking, but I just saw something that's really interesting that I just want to note is that, one person said in the chat, like, we took away our kid's phone and we got our kid back. Like, this was a game changer. And then someone else said, like, we took away our kid's phone and there was no difference. The kid was just like frustrated. And, like, essentially, I think probably like feeling really cut off. And I just want to validate that one of the things that we see so clearly, and this is borne out by data, I think it's study after study, is that teens and kids are not having a monolithic experience of technology. Like they
Yeah.
are not a monolith. And we want to encourage you to lean on your own instincts about what your kids need, because it is not our goal to tell you like, your kids should have tech, no problem, or your kids should never have tech. Like we appreciate that different families are making different choices for a lot of different reasons. And that there really are kids for whom like at particular moments, there are apps or devices that are just intersecting with their vulnerabilities in ways that are really hard. And on the other hand, there are kids for whom not having access is worse than having the access. And we want to just really like, I think, validate that both of those things are possible. And so like you see in the chat playing out in real time what I think we have seen and felt a lot from teens in our research.
Exactly. And I don't think, well, for example, you make the point in your book, and I guess I would come down more on this side, that the teens really are their phones. And as a parent, unilaterally taking away their social circle doesn't strike me as a good thing to do. How do you ladies, researchers, fall on that?
I mean, we
Well,
have
I
to
mean,
think,
I think
yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
I think tuning into the particular, there may be moments where our teens want us to be the ones to take the phone away. But I think, I think what you name is, that for so many teens that, their social life and their social circles are in there. I mean, some teens, aren't allowed to have Snapchat, and so they feel this sense of FOMO that they can't be a part of that. And then other teens can't have phones at all, and then there's this whole other level of FOMO because, or actually not just FOMO, not just fear of missing out. They know they're missing out because they cannot participate in the conversations at lunch. Now, that doesn't mean that we just yield. We have to think about like the ways in which we give them access to these things, be there to support them. And also like that, I think that advocacy piece is so, that proxy agency piece is so important. Sometimes, like we want to provide support for our kids, but sometimes the most helpful help doesn't come from us. So ensuring that there are supports out there for our teens at their schools, whether it be in health class or peer mentoring situations. These are places where teens really, really get meaningful support about navigating all kinds of things, digital life included.
I just wanted to say also that if you are thinking about trying to create a context where your kid gets a phone break, it becomes so important to make sure that it's not just taking the phone, but giving something in its place that is really meaningful, like an opportunity to connect with other teens. Like maybe they're at summer camp and that's why they're not on their phone, or they're participating in an activity that they really love, or it's no phones during a hangout time when they're actually face to face with other kids. We don't want the aim to just be like, take away the phone and give them complete social isolation. It's really important that we zero in on creating meaningful opportunities to support the things that we're trying to protect and care about. So that feels really important too. And I'm so glad. I just saw someone added something in the chat also about their 17-year-old like following sports on social media. One of the big things that teens said to us is like, please tell my parents I'm not just like wasting time all the time I'm on my phone. So asking your kids, like, what are the things that we talked about, like asking about good habits, but like, what are the things you do on your phone that you feel like are really supporting the person you want to be, or your interests, or your learning? Teens often feel like we don't even attend to those things. Adults aren't paying attention. And that's a really important part of what they want us to pay attention to also. Carrie, I know you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, another thing I want to name about the chat dynamic is there's so much good advice being exchanged among parents in the chat. And, the work that you do with Parent Venture, like convening parents together, not just to hear from experts who have written books, but to talk with one another about their pain points over parenting and exchange strategies is so important. And we've seen that, like, not just, book clubs where folks have read our book and then come together, and the conversation is kind of about our book, but it's really just a springboard for the things that are happening in your family, in your house, the things that you're struggling with, and creating that shared space for adult support. We need it too.
Well, clearly you have picked the right topic for the right time, Dr. James and Dr. Weinstein. We are so grateful for your time. I want to respect your time and our attendees' time. So last quick question. This is how we always close. What gives you hope, especially in today's digital landscape?
Oh my goodness, so many things. I mean, Carrie and I have like get asked this question a lot, and we have a couple of different answers, but I'll say like two things. One is I was just on with our teen advisory council on Wednesday night, and teens are just amazing. They give me every time we talk to them, I feel so hopeful for the ways that they are excited about making our world a better place. And that is so real and so authentic. And I think just figuring out how to continue supporting them and advocating and creating these agency opportunities. We do this work because we really think teens are incredible. I think concretely, we're also getting a lot more clarity around what they need when it comes to social media. And so just concretely, like in our work, we're starting to have many more insights about the kinds of interventions and lessons and conversations we can have with kids that are actually helpful. And that feels, I think, really good. We don't feel like we're only stuck in this space of just talking about challenges, but really envisioning forward.
That's right. We'll be waiting
and
for
I'll
the
just-
next book called What Do You Say?
Carrie?
Carrie, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, I would just add to that like actually teens more often than not want to talk to us, but especially when it comes to tech, we often start our conversations with so many assumptions, like in the
Yeah.
wrong places. And so if we can figure out different entry points, it's huge. The other thing is here and there, the policy issue has come up, and there are things that are happening. I know in California, the age appropriate design code measures, there is stuff underway. There is energy, there's momentum around that, and see what you can do to support those kinds of measures, both locally as well as nationally.
Well, thank you both, Dr. Emily Weinstein and Dr. Carrie James, for this wonderful work that you're doing. We know and hope that you will keep going because clearly the need is there. So we appreciate you both. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you everyone who joined us and all the wonderful questions in chat. It has been a tremendous session. Take care, everybody, and we hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.